I spent some time in the army as a medic treating some of the most gruesome and intricate battlefield injuries in medicine, and today I wanted to examine, explain, and break down all of Darth Vader's disastrous injuries on Mustafar. Let's examine first how it would be affected by the traumatic amputation he suffered from Obi-Wan. A common myth about lightsabers is that they instantly cauterize any wounds or injuries that they cause, and this is just not the case. Lightsabers, according to Star Wars guidebooks, radiate actually very little heat, and the point and length of contact would not be long enough to instantly stem any bleeding, especially from a very quick strike like the one that Obi-Wan delivers. Losing limbs in a traumatic amputation, depending on the cause, would result in a condition known as shock. It's a fancy way of saying that the body is unable to sustain its normal function. Given that his femoral and radial artery were severed based on the location of his injuries, I would take a guess and say that Vader would suffer from hypovolemic shock. This type of shock is massive uncontrolled loss of fluid volume, in this case blood. Known in the medical world as hemorrhaging, this is by far the most threatening thing that a medic on the battlefield races against, and for Vader it won't be any different. There are 4 stages that we use to understand the severity for hypovolemic shock depending on the amount of blood loss, and looking at Vader's mechanism of injury, he would almost immediately be at stage 3 after approximately 2 minutes. This is really bad for obvious reasons, because at this point he's lost almost half his blood volume, anywhere from 30 to 40%. It's here that most people either lose consciousness or become completely delusional, which, to be fair, Anakin already was. Unfortunately for Vader, he's a Sith, and his anger would keep him fully aware and conscious for what was about to happen to him next. Of course, I'm referring to his immolation. The degree of his burns would be something unfamiliar to most people, as most only know the top 3 most seen burns in media, that being 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree. However, there are actually 6 degrees of burn classifications that we use to categorize the extent of these injuries. Looking at how virtually all of Vader's post-operative life was spent on constant life support, it's more than likely that he suffered from anywhere from 4th to 5th degree. Now, I know what you're thinking.
Star Wars University, what about the 6th degree?
Well, the reason why I can rule out the 6th degree is I've never actually seen a living patient with 6th degree burns. Anyway, these 2 classifications usually burn down to the bone, and although we don't see any sort of exposed ligaments, tendons, or muscle, Vader's organs would be in a permanent state of shock, unable to function on their own without external stimulation. His lungs would be at the worst off by far, as the heat and ash from the lava would all but destroy his bronchioles and alveoli, also known as the tiny air sacs in your lungs. As a response to this trauma, these tiny air sacs would fill themselves with liquid and mucus, making it almost impossible for Vader to breathe. Again, Vader's injuries would compound onto one another, as this symptom only exacerbated another one, his compartment syndrome. Compartment syndrome happens when tissues such as muscles or skin have massive pressure increases inside of an osteo or neuropathic compartment. In non-medical terms, the place where muscle meets the bone and becomes a tendon. Without immediate treatment, ischemia or reduced blood flow would occur. Due to this lack of fresh oxygen to his limbs, his tissue would start to die at an alarming rate, causing him to develop necrosis. As you probably guessed, Vader would succumb to both of these complications due to his burns, as the ischemia caused his limbs to need amputation, and the necrosis would force him into a back-to-tank hibernation, where droids would need to constantly scrape off dying infected tissue for the rest of his life, which is incredibly painful, by the way. For Vader, this would be the death of Anakin Skywalker, and the most traumatic thing that had ever happened in his life. For us, it was the birth of the most iconic, intimidating, and badass villain of all time.